Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest back on for the second time, Dr. Brandon Roberts. We were just talking off air. The last time we had him on was about 3 years ago to the date, episode 70. I had a good some good conversation then. If you want to obviously hear more, definitely go listen to that. But real quick, if you're not familiar with Brandon, he serves as the Chief Science Officer at Tailored Coaching Method. He has a PhD in muscle biology and master's in human performance and a BS in molecular biology, along with over a decade of experience as a strength coach. And he's also authored more than 40 peer-reviewed publications, garnering over 1,500 citations. And it's gone through like muscle growth, nutrition, drugs, and supplements. So Brandon knows his stuff. And also he came on and he is super lean right now too. And he's in the middle of a bodybuilding competitions or bodybuilding prep. So it's going to be super cool to chat about him with that. So Brandon, welcome back on the podcast.
Yeah, Jeff, thanks for having me back on. I've seen you've done some mad work since I've joined and really had some great guests on and done some cool podcasts. It's stoked to be back on.
Yeah, absolutely. And always good to get people back on for the second time, especially when I had them on like initially, because I hope at least I got better at being a host. So hopefully I'll ask you better questions. And yeah, I love having these. I'm sure you're on a lot of podcasts. It's always cool to just be able to connect with people like yourself and have these conversations and maybe learn some things that I going in didn't even think about. So it's always fun. And I love doing these. It's cool to network and get to know people. So yeah, again, appreciate your time and really looking forward to our chat today. So since it's been since August 2021, since we last chat somewhere around then, what are maybe some big things that have happened personally, professionally, and then we'll obviously get into your training and stuff too.
Yeah, so I think last time we talked, we were at the beginning of my time in the Army and at USARIUM up in Boston, starting a research line. Since then, I've got probably like five different projects in completely different directions in different phases, which is always fun. Mastered the art of networking to get with different groups of people that I can help and also bridging the technology gaps where, for example, we have a study with continuous glucose monitors that's going to start up here in the next 4 or 5 months. I'm looking at anti-obesity medications because obesity is a big problem in civilians, but also the military, how those are utilized and have a big study on that. And then we finished all of the NSAID, almost all of it. There's one more paper I need to write when I get some data, but how NSAIDs affect skeletal muscle and bone across the translational spectrum. So cells, rodents, humans, a little bit of everything. So yeah, so lots of cool stuff going on.
That's awesome. Yeah. And one of the things I want to talk to you about was some of the research that you have been involved in. And so you said a few things were the NSAIDs. I know that was something that you're super big on. What's like the general, where are we at there with that at the moment?
Yeah, so what we ended up doing was so one of the things I love and I really set my career up to do is translational science. So I can go from cells to human clinical trials. So what we did in this case was we had a question on whether NSAIDs affected muscle and bone adaptations during exercise. So we did some cell culture and we said, hey, let's sprinkle some NSAIDs on some muscle and some bone cells, see what happens. And we use that as like a screening tool, much like they do in drug development, to really hone down from probably 20 NSAIDs to 5 to 7. And then, so we found that at high dosage, some of the NSAIDs, especially the prescribed ones like celecoxib, which is commonly known as Celebrex, cause kind of maladaptation at really high doses, like things that you probably wouldn't see in humans, honestly. So, but we're like, okay, these set of NSAIDs are worth looking at closer. So we moved it to animals. And so we did a huge animal study, biggest animal study I've ever done. 150 rats, 10 different groups, 5 NSAIDs. We made them exercise 30 minutes a day for 6 weeks. They're young, so they're still growing a little bit. So we had that effect. Had placebo group, non-exercise groups. And so that ended in March. There's one paper out on that on acetaminophen, which is one of the NSAIDs, and there's another one coming on all the other NSAIDs. So acetaminophen isn't a classical NSAID, however, it's NSAID-like. So that's why we were studying it as maybe an alternative to some of the other ones. But what we found basically was these NSAIDs didn't really affect muscle or bone detrimentally or beneficially. So you see kind of, all right, maybe in healthy situations, and it was a lower dose of NSAIDs and a lower dose of exercise, we are okay. So then we took those five and we said, all right, we're going to narrow it down a little bit more. Let's go to humans. And we used celecoxib because that was one of the cells, that's one of the drugs in cells. And then we used ibuprofen because that's the most commonly used one.
Yep.
And then we used an old school one called flurbiprofen. And that is because it's like the opposite mechanism of celecoxib. And so what that means is like there's COX enzymes. And so if you do that, you can say, is it this mechanism or is it this one? And ibuprofen is actually right in the middle. So that was really beneficial. So we did an acute study, had them exercise a whole bunch, and a whole bunch is 10 sets of 10 at 40% one rep max. And it was like a leg press, but it was a plyometric leg press. So it was a jumping kind of athletic movement. And I did it a couple times. It was hard. Like it was a lot of volume, hard work. Heart rates are up in the like 150s, doing 2 minutes between sets. It was a lot. And so we took blood so we could do biomarkers for bone because you can't really measure bone shortly in humans like you can animals. And we also did muscle biopsies, which is, again, bread and butter over here. And so what we found with that was also surprising based on literature. And these are young, healthy, trained people. And I would say trained in terms of most of them had to resistance train at least once a week and run or do some aerobic activity at least once a week. So they're moderately active. And so what we found was, and this is published in European Journal of Applied Physiology just like last month, there was no effect on the AKT signaling, so muscle protein synthesis surrogates, on inflammation, actually we didn't publish inflammation stuff yet, but there wasn't large effects on inflammation either. And we're leaning towards, hey, in the literature, if you look at the older adults, NSAIDs may be detrimental. If you look at younger adults, and we used a single dose, much like you would do right before you went and try to just do some really hard workout or some event or something. Try to mimic that. We need to make it through this. We found basically that it didn't do anything, good or bad. And I was like, okay, that's novel. And it was a pretty high single dose.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. So it seems like there's no positive, but no negative either for the most part. Because my understanding kind of for a while was like higher dosages are going to be something that could potentially impact hypertrophy. But I don't know if that's like a timing thing or is that something that we need to consider with this or yeah.
Yeah. And it's because it was acute, it's hard to tease that out exactly. Because there is some literature that suggests, like I was mentioning, that it's not ideal for long-term hypertrophy, but it's really mixed. And I wish we could do like a long-term study, but because we think it might be bad, it's one of those things where we really need to rationalize it before we do it. Because if it does affect muscle and bone, and we're doing it in like soldiers, for example, it's not really great in terms of ethically. I think for now we've wrapped that project up. Like I mentioned, there'll be papers. There's papers in review. There's papers trickling out. There's probably one or two more. But I think from a perspective of either low dose, low intensity exercise, or high dose, acute, high intensity exercise just once, there's not really detrimental effects. Now, when they ask us, okay, how do we transfer this into policy? What does this mean? I'm like, all right, so maybe just because of the whole body of literature, let's not prescribe high doses for long periods. But if somebody needs it to get through something, maybe we say that's okay, but we don't really like it. You know what I mean? Like, preferably you don't take any unless you're in extreme circumstances where you need it to reduce inflammation, or if you have a physician who's, hey, you just had surgery, or hey, you have an infection, right? It just for you and I, we're going to work out, probably just try to skip it.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's okay if you don't need it, probably don't necessarily like you shouldn't just be popping those in and taking them. I'm assuming for you, the reason you wanted to look at this in general was obviously doing your work for the military, and obviously I'm assuming it was like, hey, sometimes I'm assuming they're probably not always feeling great, so it's hey, we're going to take this to see if it can improve. Is that essentially what you're looking at here to see if it was something that could? Was it more on the side of seeing if it could improve things because again now they're not feeling as much pain, or yeah, what was the rationale behind that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So when we looked at the epidemiological data, those people who are in basic training or some other environments too are like way more likely to get injured, like 5 times more likely if they are taking NSAIDs. And so that was the rationale of, okay, is this because there's a mechanistic reason, like a molecular reason, partially, if that kind of made sense? Or is it because they can now go do more and make it through, toughen it out? And so I'm leaning towards they can probably just do more. So they're just breaking themselves. But we can't, yeah, but we can't do that in the lab. Like we can, even the overtraining studies, they don't really break people like they do in some of these military training environments where you're just like, no, low sleep, low food, on your feet all day, rucking in extreme environments, under stress, and new environments too. So it's just really hard to mimic that in the lab. We did the best we could and tried to answer some of the questions, but I think there is a little bit more room for work there. I just don't know if we're gonna be the ones to do it.
Yeah, you maxed out what you wanted to know from that topic specifically. You also mentioned continuous glucose monitors. Is this for military or is this just like for, again, just general body composition type stuff or both? I'm assuming you could probably use some of this research for just general body composition stuff as well too for the general public.
Yeah, so that's what I try to do in my research lines is basically we do research. My job is to do research for the military. However, you can apply that to a lot of different populations. Sometimes, for example, get off on tangent right now, like we're working with special forces, and I got two studies with them. Doesn't really apply to civilians. Like they're just not gonna. It just doesn't apply, but they could. And so what we're gonna do is so CGMs are so not controversial, but novel outside of diabetes. And so you see triathletes and endurance athletes and all these different types of athletes, CrossFitters, starting to use them to try to enhance performance. But there's not enough research to say how to use them or if they're even useful, right? Because you see they're exercising and maybe you see a little slight blood glucose decline. That's normal. And then sometimes when you exercise, you see like a drop and then a peak because your body's, oh, snap, I need glucose. So it pushes glucose. So what we're going to do is we're just going to slap a couple CGMs on people, 100 people or so, and we're going to feed them different food types. And we're just going to make them exercise. And we're going to say, okay, if we feed them a high fat, and high fat is like relative, like a 60% fat diet for a week, how does their blood glucose change? To give them a performance test at the end. Does that affect anything? And just characterize, is there anything worth studying here in these two high carb, high fat diets? And the exercise is going to be like a 3 mile run or like something somewhat applicable to general population, but probably slightly more applicable to the military population. And I haven't quite written that, like I'm in the protocol writing phase. Like we got the grant and I have a couple of partners that we're going to work with, but yeah, it's more of a, like let's figure out if this is worth anything study.
Do you have any idea do you have any thoughts on where you think it could go, or are you just this is the main thing why you want to do it is you just really have no idea and you want to find out?
Yeah. So I think as of the literature right now, it doesn't really look useful, but I think it's worth at least taking a closer look. And there are lots of people doing these. Louise Burke is famous sports scientist. She's doing it. There's a couple big names in exercise science doing these studies already. So I'm hoping as I develop my protocol, as I get things going, research takes 3 to 4 years plus some other time. We can find a really nice home for how this could benefit. If it can, if it can't, then I can go tell all of my soldiers or whatever. I can say, hey, don't waste your money. Those things are like $150 for 2 weeks or something. Just don't worry about it. Because much like athletes, and I don't think the military population should be compared to athletes as much as they are, but the upper level are always looking for an edge. So we just had the Olympics, and you look at the times in the races, and it's a percent difference is the difference between like first and fifth. So if there is a chance at something being beneficial 1 to 3%, let's say, and we'll say caffeine and creatine are the extremes here. We're like, they show really good benefits. We're probably not going to get that. But if we can get in the 1 to 2% range, that could be a gold medal for an Olympic athlete, but that could be life or death for a soldier. So I'm not confident it's going to work out, but I think that's the scientist in me anyway.
Yeah. So again, like you said, you're just trying to some of this stuff. It's okay. Is it going to make a huge difference? No. But like you said, for some people, that little bit could make a huge difference for people high up. And then obviously for people in the military, it's again, like you said, it could be life or death potentially in certain situations. I'm just curious. This is more so something that just popped up as you were talking about this. Do you guys ever do anything around like sleep and like deprivation with like people in the military and how that impacts things? I'm just curious to hear if you guys do anything around that.
Yeah, so we've got actually a sleep deprivation study going on now, and it's not my study, but it's looking at muscle protein synthesis and a couple other things. But our institute doesn't do as much sleep research. That's more of another research institute's lane, but we collaborate a lot with them and we're doing some of it. We're just not set up with the beds and stuff. They're also really intensive to do. Like we've done a lot of sleep studies, but if you start restricting people's sleep to 4 hours, which is about as low as you can go, you have to have staff with them and keep them up.
Yeah.
So like it's a really big staff burden to have to come in at 2 a.m. and say, all right, this person, you got to keep them awake between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. because they'll wake back up right around 6 or 5 or 6, whenever they normally wake up. But that 12 to 4 a.m., that's a rough shift.
That again, this is where anytime I bring a researcher on, it always opens my eyes to like things that again in your mind, it's, oh yeah, just you can do this study, but then you don't really think about the logistics of everything. And like that, for example, you got to have somebody there to make sure people are up during. So again, it's all these things that you don't really think about with some of these studies. So always appreciate what researchers do because I think it's crazy to how in depth and whatnot you have to go with these things. That's some of the stuff you've been doing professionally. What about, is there any research that you enjoy staying up to date on that maybe you aren't actively doing, but you just stay up to date on? Is there anything that's maybe caught your eye over the last couple of years or something you've really been focused on specifically?
Yeah, because I have my own research lane, so I have to keep up with that literature. It's become a little bit more difficult, but being with TCM and having coaches constantly ask me questions, I have to stay up to date. I'm really interested in where the stretch mediated hypertrophy is going. Is it beneficial? Is it more beneficial? Should we start incorporating it into our training? Schoenfeld's doing a great job with his research, but I'd love to see some other people get their skin in the game because as a researcher, I like to see lots of different people
Yeah.
show different studies, and there's just some small nuances. While one can be like the greatest researcher, which is awesome, you got to have that like holistic support. I'm super interested in hypertrophy all the time. Like I'm a bodybuilder, that's my home. I will always care. The nutrition stuff, I think I I haven't seen. One of the coolest studies I've seen recently is Jordan Trommelin, who is in the fitness space, but has really dug deep into the science. He's doing great work and the high protein doses. So he did a study where he gave like 100 grams and 40 grams, and he found that protein synthesis increased as expected, but more than anybody else has shown. But protein oxidation did not increase as much. So it's then saying, wow, okay, we thought that they were going to be in tandem,
Yeah.
but now is there a reason for us to eat more protein? And if you think about bigger picture, how that aligns with Jose Antonio's work of like high protein diets contributing to fat-free mass, it really opens the can of worms of, okay, do we need to start looking at those higher protein stuff again? I think so. I don't know if it'll make a huge difference, but again, as a bodybuilder, I'm like, hey, give me a 5% advantage. I'm working around a 5-year timeline anyway, so let's do it. So yeah, that's two of the bigger things I'm interested in right now. I do a review for reps and stuff. So I have done a couple different things for them, Weightology merged with them. And so that's how I like to stay rounded, but I don't have a lot of time to just read for fun too much.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, the protein one's interesting because I guess from your kind of thought is like, now this can mean, I thought the main kind of takeaway was, again, you could have more at one time than we thought, but, and then, but it sounds like too, it could be overall protein could potentially be something that we could increase as well too. And it's funny because you also hear the other end. I feel like the pendulum always swings. I feel like with fitness stuff where it's also like some people are saying, well, maybe you don't need as much as you think either. So let's keep your both ends there. But again, I'm sure this is something that research will eventually get us closer to the answer that we want over time.
Yeah, yeah. I think as we go, we get more context to some things,
Yeah.
right? So there's a detraining study that came out not that long ago, and it's you don't really need to do much training to not lose anything. It's yeah, we already knew that. It's good to see again, but who is your target audience, right?
Yep.
Is it those people who are probably listening to this podcast and really just want to go that extra level? Or is it like Gen Pop, where I'm talking to my family or I'm talking to my friends who are just struggling to get in the gym 3 times a week? So I think one of the things being pulled back a little bit away from the deep fitness world is like realizing, hey, it's okay if we take different paths to do different things. The aging too, I'm sure you get busy and you're like, yeah, maybe this year isn't the hypertrophy year.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting stuff. The stretch mediated hypertrophy is definitely another big one as well too. That was definitely making its rounds all over the place. Where do you stand with that? Again, I know you're probably just going off of what the literature says, but do you lean towards one way or the other there with that? And are you putting that kind of in practice into your own training or anything like that?
Yeah, so I would say what I've done, and I haven't really changed much because I already had some of it in there, like as much as I thought was really necessary.
Yeah.
So for some of my movements, a good example is triceps. As a bodybuilder, my arms are actually one of my weaker points, body points. So what I've done for triceps is most of my triceps are in a lengthened position. So that would be like an overhead type extension or like a kickback with a cable that I'd extended. So I've done some of those things. I haven't added any like stretching between sets or like holding or like pauses or anything like that. It's just very minor tweaks.
Yeah.
And most of those were there already. So sometimes it's, hey, instead of 3 sets of these 2 exercises for triceps, I'm just going to do, 6 sets of this one now, like once a week. And the next session, our body session, I'll do 3 and 3. Not a ton, but enough to say there looks like there's an advantage. So let me jump in a little bit.
Yeah, might as well put a little bit in it. Maybe if anything, just biasing it a little bit more maybe than you did in the past, but not going full on like only doing length and work and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like there was a time when like drop sets were a thing and it was like, they're the best. And everybody switched their workouts. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. I have found what I enjoy and what I can recover from well and what I can do in a timely manner in the gym. So all my workouts are like 45 to 60 minutes max. And I really like, I'm in a good place. I was looking at my photos from 2019 when I last competed, which is 5 years. And I'm like, no, I put on probably a solid like 5 pounds of muscle. Like me and my coach were looking at pictures and we're like, yeah, we did good, but it took 5 years, right? Could it have been faster? Maybe. Could I have maybe put on another half a pound? Probably tweaking some stuff, but it was like I was like, no, it was easy. This is just life. Like I'm just going to train 4 or 5 times a week, and I feel good. And also, I out ran a half marathon in there and trained up for all kinds of other stuff. So I was like, yeah, I'm in a good place.
Yeah, it's you could sit there and be like, could I have gained more? Maybe, but it's like you said, it like, easy, quote unquote easy, right? And it fit your lifestyle and you were able to enjoy it, also do other things. And so did the best you could in that time and you made progress and that's all we can ask for, I feel like there. Which speaking of, you're like you said, I didn't know you were competing and you got on camera and I was like, holy crap, he is looking lean. You're getting ready for a bodybuilding show. You said Boston World's kind of something maybe you're shooting for there. Maybe just fill the audience in on what you've been doing, how long you've been prepping and yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. The last time I competed was 2019, about in the fall. And I did a couple shows. I took overalls at one medium-sized show. I didn't compete at like the national level. It was like a more regional level type thing. And I got done with that show and I was like, hey, I've got some weight to gain. Like the guy who beat me for going to Worlds, I was like, no, he's probably 10 years older than me, but also he's bigger. Like he's got some weight on me. So I got in the gym and I was like, all right, let's just get some work in. And then I got the itch. You get the itch after you forget how hard it is. What happens for bodybuilders. So I started truly prepping like April 1st, we'll call it. So it's been
Months.
March 1st. Yeah, 4 or 5 months. I started at 165 pounds and I'm down to about 145. So it's a pretty like long prep so far, but slow rate of weight loss. Probably got another couple pounds to shave off. My first show is in a couple weeks. I'm probably like a month out. And then so that's like a warm-up show. And I'm in the Boston area. So my goal was to try to qualify for the BF worlds or WNBF worlds in the pro status, but I'm not a pro, so I have to qualify and I have to become a pro, which is a whole feat in itself. I thought last time I competed, I was like, oh, I'll get my pro card, and I was like, no, it's actually pretty hard.
Yep.
So the goal is to get the pro card. I think that's a reasonable goal, even if I have to go to a bunch of shows and don't quite get the best judging or the best lineups or whatever, because bodybuilders should know it's all about who shows up that day.
Yeah.
It's not that it's like you work hard, but also who showed up. If am I competing against Eric Helms and Eric Drexler? Or am I competing against the person who doesn't really have a great coach or understand all this stuff or really know how to diet and exercise appropriately? Because there's a big difference. And I'll compete, and then we have a couple weeks. So the difference between my first show and last week show is about 12 weeks, which is really unfortunate and long time. So I'll be prepping in total for 8 months or in prep, which is, I think, a little too long. I really like the 6 month mark just for life. Like my wife is like, you're going to stay under 145 pounds for 3 months. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good point. That's going to suck. So I'm hopeful. I'm going to go to there's a show out here in the East Coast. It's Natural Mania. I'm going to do that one. Hopefully get the Worlds also has a non-pro option. So I'll still do Worlds no matter what. It's just semi-pro or not. That's
Yeah.
all. And if I'm a pro, it'll be harder and I won't win anything. But if I'm not, then maybe I'll win something. But also I'm not doing it necessarily to win. I'm just testing myself and really looking at what's in the next 5 years, because I think I'm going to compete probably every 5 years or so. Where do I need to improve so that I look better? Because that's the goal. And I think I already know what it is. My arms are really lagging. I'm just like, man, I got tiny arms.
Yeah, you get to train more arms though, right? That's always fun. Yeah, no, that's so been in this for about 4 to 5 months. Real quick, just out of curiosity, how tall are you?
5'8", so
Right.
about,
Okay, cool.
yeah.
Yeah. I feel like our weight and height is very similar there. It's just curious on that. But yeah, cool. So what was there anything you did like in this prep in terms of fat loss methods, anything like that? Or was it just good old, hey, calorie restriction, obviously, but was it straight through refeeds, diet breaks? What did that kind of look like?
Yeah, that's so good question. My body responds really well to steps or cardio. So at first it was easy. Like we went from my maintenance was like 2,400 calories, maybe 2,300. And so we just took off like 400 calories a week and said, hey, get 7,000 steps a day on average, 7 to 8. So I lost weight on that for a good while, probably like, and then probably about a month ago, we went, all right, now we're gonna take our calories down to 17 to 1,800, and we're gonna do 12 to 14,000 steps a day, which like if I have a fairly sedentary job, so I'm like walking probably 2 hours of cardio per day. And I call it's not like real cardio because I'm not like on a bike, but I am either outside or on a treadmill. So it's been pretty straightforward in terms of calories and cardio. I've done refeeds and I've taken a diet break or two because of like work stuff. Like there's some environments where I'm just like, I can't track accurately. I've been doing this for 2 decades and I'm still like not sure that I can hit 2,000 calories. So let's do the best I can, but not worry about it. So I had a 2 week trip in there. I had a couple of life events like weddings and special, like we had an anniversary and stuff like that. Had a vacation in there. I went down to St. Croix to all inclusive, and that was hard. So yeah, probably 2 or 3 diet breaks in there, which helps with the length of time in prep. And then one refeed. Now we're at one refeed a week. So I'm standard 17 to 1,800 calories a day, one refeed a week to about 2,500. So not quite 1,000 calorie refeed, but close.
And how are you feeling at this point? Like I said, you're again for people that are watching on YouTube, they can see how lean you look, but for people that are listening, you can't see. Well, how are you feeling? What's that looking like?
Yeah, so I'm definitely feeling prep. I think when we cut my calories from 19 to 17 and push those steps up from 10 to 12 to 14,000 a day, I was like, ooh, okay, I've got to be strategic around my meetings, around my life, around like when are my carbs coming in. I'm hungry most of the time. Like it just doesn't go away. In terms of mood, I'm a pretty patient person. I'm pretty calm. So a couple people can tell and they can look at me and be like, you've been in a diet. What are you prepping again? But most people can't tell. I can feel it though. Like it's I'm each week I'm looking forward to my refeed. How about that? I'm like, oh yeah.
You're looking forward to that day more and more each week, basically. What's your like game plan on those days? Is it just like basically just same foods, a little bit higher? Do you try to have some flexibility, or yeah, what does that kind of look like?
Yeah. So right now I still have some flexibility and I try to like we'll go out for and have dinner out. And so there is some definitely some estimation in there, which I think once I get past my first show, maybe that goes away and it is just like literally more oatmeal and more rice and more whatever bodybuilder foods that I want to eat. Fruit. But for right now, like last Saturday, we went out to an Italian place and I had it's actually pretty clean in terms of serving. So I estimated that bowl of pasta sauce and figured it out. So one meal a week is pretty flexible, but again, I've been tracking for 15 years, so I got a good idea of what I'm doing.
Yeah, and you probably still have to leave that meal feeling like you want a little bit more too, right? It's like you get it, but you probably don't want to leave that meal feeling super full, otherwise you might have overdone it that day for yeah, whenever you have those meals.
Yeah, definitely. Like it's you always finish a meal hungry is the good indicator, like you said. That's great. Great one.
Yeah, and then the obviously the tasty foods taste even better when you're in this deficit, and obviously the leaner you get there. I always like to ask this because I think again people see somebody get shredded like yourself and like think it's just all oh hey you look good and you feel good, but you actually really don't. Right, there are some potential downsides to getting this lean and just things that you have to look out for. Are you going to keep your deficit kind of the same, or will that just be something that you're just going to play by ear in terms of like how you're looking or
Yeah, so I think each week, so I just pulled up my sheet and took a little peek. Each week, as long as I'm losing weight, I probably won't change anything. So I have my coach is Jeff Albert through you. Yep, I worked with him for the past two preps. He really helped compliments me because I was like, Jeff, I don't need the science. I need the posing. Like it's an art.
yeah, it
And so
is.
he helps tremendously with that. And so I just re-upped and said, hey man, ready to go again? He's like, yeah, let's go. But going forward, yeah, I think we'll probably have to dig a little bit more in the calories, probably get down another couple pounds. I can still see some like fat spots and on my lower back, I tend to hold, everybody does, like lower back and glutes, right? Those are the last two things to really come in. So I put a couple like random posing things up on my Instagram, but I need to do a new one because it's been about a month. But yeah, I got a little room to dig, and it'll be either 100 calories less or more steps, and it's a trade-off. I'm like, I don't know which one I want right now. Both suck.
Yeah. Pick your poison basically with that. Cool, man. Yeah, that's awesome. Obviously, you're towards the latter half of it, but you still also have a decent way to go. But yeah, it's always interesting finding out about these things and hearing a little bit more about anything. With that, hopefully next time we'll talk to you, you'll obviously we'll get to hear what happens. And yeah, so cool. I had a couple topics I wanted to bring up here in chat about. So the first one I wanted to talk about was, does your metabolism decline with age, right? I think this is a good segue into that. I know you had a post on this recently, and I know there was a study, I think that came out now probably a couple of years ago. I think it was Ponser that kind of came out with this. And
Yep.
again, a lot of people think that, okay, as you get older, this slows down, right? Your metabolism slows down, and they found something different. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it and then have a couple of follow-up questions with it.
Yeah, for sure. So this was it was a really high-profile study. And so what they did was there's something called the doubly labeled water database. And double labeled water is a technique you can use to measure energy expenditure. It's the gold standard. We actually use this in my lab. I'm super stoked. I'm doing it with some special forces guys. You drink the water and it's labeled with deuterium and it's heavy. So it presents with a different molecular profile. If you think back to chemistry, it has a heavy water, so it's a heavy hydrogen and a heavy oxygen. And so when you process this, you breathe part of it out and then you urinate the other part out. And so you can take a urine collection and you know how much you gave them. So it's based on body weight. You give them a dosage and they drink it. And then you collect urine at certain time points and there's this mad scientist data sheet I have, and you can measure how much energy they're expending based on the equation. And I'll use that method from this database that's, again, biggest in the world, like thousands of people, like 6,000 in there. There's probably the whole database if we're really thinking about it. And they did it in terms of a cross-sectional design. So what that means is not everybody was in the study at the same time. It wasn't like, hey, we're going to follow you over time. It was, hey, here's a measurement from an older study where we had someone do this for a couple days, got their energy expenditure, but they weren't doing anything. So it was not like interfered with by exercise and nutrition. And we're just going to store that in a bank. And so then we had this bank of people, different shapes, sizes, ages, sexes. There's even like babies in there, where you could say, all right, what if you put all these people on a scatter plot and you just look at all the factors, where does their energy expenditure fall, which can be metabolism, in terms of uh, across their lifespan and habit, and they also have body composition. So with double liver water, you can do a two compartment model, so you can get total body water. You can figure out how much fat mass and how much fat free mass they have, and so then you can get that information. And there's a couple other things I think they got, like body weight. And so you can take all this information, you can graph it, and you can then run some statistics. Which honestly, if you look at the graphs, and I covered it way back in weightology, and then there's definitely an Instagram post on this. But you can see, like at age 60-ish, there's just a decline in total energy expenditure. And it's subtle and it drops off, and 90 is, looking at the graph now, I'm like, yeah, it definitely drops off around 60. And it increases from 0 to, let's call it 18-year-olds. So your energy expenditure each year gets higher as you're growing, which makes sense. You're like, yeah, that makes sense. I'm getting bigger. I should spend more energy. Metabolism should be more. But then when you hit like full growth, so 18, 20-year-old, all the way to age 60, it doesn't really change. And that's most of people's lives. If we think about what people do in their lifespan, the first portion of it, they have a lot more time if they're interested in exercise or whatever to do things. And then as you age, most people have kids. So then your 30, 40s, you have work, which really starts to take over. You get like heavily invested in all kinds of different stuff, hobbies, and maybe things change. And people are generally their heaviest at age 50. So it's like peak body weight in your lifetime. And then it slowly declines from there. But one of the cool things they did was in energy expenditure, the largest portion of that, how much energy you burn in a day for metabolism, is muscle and organ mass or fat-free mass. And so they just said how much of your metabolism is purely from fat-free mass. It was like 83%, which is pretty big. You can't control your organ size, but you definitely can control muscle size. And if you look at a graph, there are some people who are up in 7,000 calorie a day mark, which is incredible. And at the same age, another person's like in the 1,900 calories a day. There's a lot of variation across your lifespan, across age, across people. Most of it is accounted for by your fat free mass. Now, when they could do, you can do some modeling and statistics and adjust for body size, fat free mass. And when they did that, they still saw at about age 60, you see a subtle decline in energy expenditure. So I think in terms of this is it was in Science, which is like the best scientific journal in the world. So it's a huge study, really cool, first of its kind. I think I really enjoyed it, but there's still caveats to it, right? So in a perfect world, if you were going to do this and say, all right, how do we actually know that your metabolism declines across age? We would follow you across your age and give you double labeled water every 10 years and measure it, right? So that'd be a better study design. Can that happen? I can. It didn't here, and it would cost a lot. But that would be a better study design. So this is cross-sectional, that would be longitudinal. So I think outside of that limitation, there's not a whole lot of others. I think when you think about sarcopenia or muscle loss with age, that generally kicks in around age 60. But it's more focused on people who don't exercise, probably people who are like not listening to this podcast, need to worry about that, right? Like you and I, we're going to be fine. Like we love exercise. Your listeners love exercise. As long as you do something across your lifespan, you're not really going to have to worry about this stuff. And that's what I tell people is, how do we apply this? You just keep doing the same thing you're doing, right? If you're not exercising, this is a great way to say, hey, grandma, I've noticed that there's a study that came out and your metabolism decreases as you age. Cool. But also, you're not really maintaining that fat-free mass, so that muscle mass. So yours is declining even more. And so you're eating the same. And if you're eating the same, you're probably gaining fat if you're not exercising. So that's where people get in trouble is across their lifespan, their habits change for good or bad. But at a certain point, their metabolism also. So I thought it was a cool study.
Yeah.
Most people don't realize that like muscle mass is for every, I think it's kilo of, so 2 pounds of muscle, it's only about 20 calories a day. So it's really not that much. Your organs and your brain are way higher. Fat cells are like 4 or 5 calories a day per kilo. It's a cool study though.
But my understanding with the muscle is, yes, it's, if you were to compare it to, like you said, organs, your brain, like those are going to actually use up a lot of energy. But muscle, it's probably going to be something where it's like more of a, again, you're going to be able to probably beat a little bit of a higher body weight, which probably is going to help with your total daily energy expenditure. But then also there's other things outside of that where like to maintain that muscle and to build it and whatnot, that's probably going to be pretty energy costly as well too. And then also there's the fact that, for example, like muscle is going to be good for insulin sensitivity, glucose. So there's those kind of downstream effects, which I don't know how big of a role that has on total daily energy expenditure, but I'm assuming that's where kind of the benefit of the muscle is outside of, if you were to just look at how many calories it burns, it's like it probably doesn't burn that much, but there's all these kind of like extra benefits from it as well too, correct?
Yeah, yeah. So I think so. You're going along a really good path here. When we think about total daily energy expenditure, we have basal metabolic rate. So that's just like you sitting at rest. That the body composition plays a big role there. On top of that, we have the thermic effect of food. So you and I eat a high protein diet. So that's the most probably thermogenic we can get. It's about 10-15%. But the rest, and really like 30% or so, is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So fidgeting, walking around, and I guess there is a component of exercise, like you mentioned, that costs energy, right? So if you don't exercise, that's gone. If you don't move a lot, your need is low, so that's also down. So I think those are good things where those are both adjustable and like you can do all kinds of stuff. That's why you see a lot of the 10,000 step rule, right? Is a guideline is linked with mortality and cardiovascular disease and all kinds of things because those are like literally you're just able and willing to move more. And that's good, especially as you age.
Right. So it sounds like really the big kind of takeaway is, again, from 20 to 60, your metabolism doesn't really drop, but it will start to at 60. But a lot of that also has to do with probably, like you said, the lean body mass aspect of it as well. That's playing a big role in that as well, too, correct? Is that kind of what you would say the takeaways are from that?
Yeah, for sure. And if you, I'm a big exercise proponent. So as you age, you should just continue exercising. You should continue like almost maybe even walking around more and just being active, whether that's gardening or walking your dog or whatever it is, because it's all linked to health span, to living well for longer periods.
Because I saw the study thrown around of, oh, hey, your metabolism doesn't decrease as you age. And I think that I'm assuming this probably, again, it's very context dependent, right? I'm assuming this is probably that message is thrown more at somebody who's 35 or 40, thinking that their metabolism has decreased a ton. But really, it's probably, again, lifestyle factors that have gotten in the way for that particular person.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you where if there were a couple headlines where if your metabolism decreases at your age and you're like, yeah, but you're not 60, so it doesn't really matter to you, especially for the fitness community. So yeah, I definitely hear you and echo that sentiment.
And what typically is that? You think it's just, again, just less activity? Probably people eat more food than they think. Like you said, job responsibilities probably take over. And you just, again, maybe it's like a stress, sleep thing too, which makes you feel like you're not really eating as much food, but you're actually eating more calories than you think. Is that probably what you think is probably the big kind of cause there from with all that?
Yeah, definitely. And it's different for each person, but it's multifactorial. It's
Yeah.
life stress, work stress, sleep, not knowing nutrition maybe. Because like people in this study, like they're just average people. They're not probably not exercising much. They're in studies. Maybe there might be I think there was a one, they actually excluded that or did it in a subset of athletes. Um, but yeah, there's just a lot of factors that we have to consider. And as coaches, that's the whole goal is how do we start to tweak those factors to make you feel better, to gain muscle, lose fat, or whatever the goal is.
Yeah. And then the total daily energy expenditure chart, I think, is super interesting too, right? The one where you said there's people at the same weight and age, and it's one person's 1,800 calories energy expenditure. And then you have some people up to 7,000. I know that was the most extreme example, I think, there, but again, it shows the variability there. Would you say that again is going to probably come down to probably a genetic aspect of it? You said lean, obviously lean body mass, but even I'm assuming energy expenditure too is probably something where, again, we don't have that data on that person who was doing 7,000, their energy expenditure was 7,000, but I'm assuming that probably is part of that as well there with that. Is there any other factors that may be at play? I know you mentioned the four aspects of the total daily energy expenditure, but I just didn't know if there was anything else there with that.
Yeah, so there's definitely something called so thrifty and spendthrift metabolisms, and I there's a lot of research on it. I think it exists. I think that we need a lot more to figure out why. Some people think like genetically, we don't have like they've done genetic studies. Nothing's like been like this gene or like this group of genes. Nothing's popped out enough yet. So we don't have a great answer for that, but there is definitely something where like you can have two people who are the same body composition and one can eat 3,000 calories a day and not gain weight, and that's their maintenance. And one can eat 2,500 and not gain weight, and that's their maintenance. And that's pretty normal. So it sucks for the person who eats less. I'm definitely on the lower end of the eating range when it comes to bodybuilders, but I'm not like absolutely worse off. So yeah, we don't have a great answer, but it's a lot of this data, even when you adjust from fat free mass, there's still that variation.
Yeah, no matter what, there's still going to be that range. I'm assuming probably most people fall within a really kind of tight range, and they're obviously going to have those extreme outliers. And probably a lot more people think they're probably more of the extreme outliers than they really are. It's again probably a lifestyle thing. Real quick though, last kind of topic, and I think this kind of goes hand in hand with this a little bit too, is metabolic adaptation. I'm just curious, where is the state of the literature at around that topic?
Yeah, so great question. And me and a couple people wrote a really nice review on metabolic adaptation for the more coaching environment in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. A couple years old, probably need to write an update. But so metabolic adaptation gets a bad rap. When you diet, a couple things happen, right? Um, your body does adapt, so it down regulates, but it's not much. Like it's 50 to 100 calories. And some people think it's even less. I think, honestly, if you're just thinking about your metabolism as calories in, calories out, and you say, all right, I'm at 2000, I'm going to diet at 1500, but my body's going to adapt so that 1500 really is like 1450. That's probably the range you're looking at. Now, that is over a long time, that could be pretty substantial if you got 50 pounds. However, in the grand scheme of your daily energy expenditure, what's more important is not necessarily that basal metabolic rate change. It's the NEAT component that we were talking about earlier, right? Because when I diet, if I wasn't a bodybuilder, I would most likely lay around more. I would move more, and that's going to account for way more calories. And there's a couple studies that can be up to a 400 calorie difference per day. Whereas, okay, now if I'm dieting, and that's where metabolic adaptation gets a bad rap, I would say. And I'm eating 500 calories less, and I'm like, no, I'm in a deficit. That should make me lose weight, but I'm also not moving as much as I used to. And maybe I go from 8,000 steps a day to 5,000, 4,000. That's where the NEAT component comes in. And metabolic, we'll say down regulation, yeah, it's really looked at, but it's not. It's just your moving life.
Yeah, so it sounds like the bigger thing at play here is the movement. I'm assuming it's obviously if you were to look, it'd be steps, but I'm assuming it's probably subconscious movement as well too, right? Where it's you
Yeah.
may be talking a little bit slower or maybe blinking a little bit less. So some subconscious things that again, somebody who's not really into this probably isn't going to notice that. They're just going to maybe feel a little bit more tired overall. And
Yeah.
I'm assuming too, is it also genetic as well in terms of like how much that will impact one person to the next?
Yeah, and so we haven't quite figured that out either, but there's definitely some genetic component. I think that going back to the spendthrift and the thrifty, kind of those are genotypes or phenotypes or really phenotypes. They're like different people. Some people adapt a lot, and so they'll get, for lack of better or more sophisticated terms, they'll adapt and conserve energy better. And their bodies will say, hey, right now I'm gonna push down so hard on all these habits, all these subconscious and metabolic things that I can, that it's gonna be really hard for you to lose weight. If you're not tracking everything, if you're not doing everything right, I'm just gonna shut it down as a body. And then other people can just they're called spendthrift. So they're like, hey, we've got plenty of calories to spend. Let's go. Like I'll drop down real fast. So there's those two components are really important. And I think I've written about that a little bit, but need to revisit it probably and put everything back together because with the diet break literature, um, we really thought that was going to do something cool, and it didn't really do it. There's some appetite regulation and maybe some mental psychological effects, but we didn't see the metabolic adaptation prevention or rescue that we were hoping to see in the Matador study and Jackson Pio's study and Bill Campbell's new study. It's not there. Okay, I guess that's not going to work, but it could offer a diet break because I like how I use them, or a refeed for other reasons.
Yeah. So it sounds like though, I mean, my understanding is it's something that probably just going to add a little bit of, I guess, I think Eric Drexler was the one that kind of coined this, but like friction more so, but it's not going to be something that's like detrimental, right? Because I think some people use it as, oh, this is why I'm not, dropping weight or body fat. But again, it just may make it a little bit tougher for you, essentially, more than anything.
Yep, exactly.
And is this something too where, again, say for you, hey, your metabolic rate's probably a little bit lower, maybe you're expending a little less energy than what we would think, but is this something where, as you get back maybe to maintenance calories or something like that, will it start to maybe upregulate again? Or is that, again, something maybe that's not super clear?
Yeah, so there's this really cool study. It's a little bit older. They actually take people and they move their body weight up and down 10%, and it adapts pretty quickly. So when you go from like it's honestly 2 or 3 weeks, where if I'm in a deficit, I come out of my deficit and I go back into a maintenance or surplus, my body is like, oh no, we recognize that. We're gonna upregulate a little bit more. And that was the hope behind the diet breaks is like your body would say, bam, let's push our metabolism way up. The problem was it like your body's smarter than you. So like as soon as you went off, it just went back down. It was like, oh, well, okay. But yes, for most people, once you get out of a deficit, your metabolic adaptation.
Yeah. And I'm assuming probably the only time it wouldn't be is if like you lost a really big amount of weight or something like that. I'm assuming you're probably going to see some change in your metabolic rate from being at really high body weight to maybe being a little bit lower. I'm assuming that would be the only case. Again, I know it's probably a little bit more complex than that, but generally
Yeah.
speaking.
Yeah. And what actually happens, so the Biggest Loser studies by Kevin Hall did that. And we thought for a while that that did happen. What I think is the bigger factor, and it does, you're right, it's pretty complex, but people's hunger, because their body it realizes that they've lost that weight and it wants it back. So people's hunger and appetite goes through the roof for a really long time and they eat it back. And that's why it's so hard to lose weight and keep it off. That's why we have an obesity epidemic. It's like your body is fighting against you the whole time.
Yep. And again, the way you go about it can make it worse or better, as you're finding out too, right? Where it's like you're hungry and you have to learn how to manage that as best as you can and just be comfortable with it. And for some people, that's just a, really challenging thing to do. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just really challenging for some people to do that. Where would you like to see this research go? Is there anything you'd like to see happen in the future around here?
Yeah. So I would love to, like I mentioned, do a longitudinal study. Maybe so if we've identified sponsors and identified 60 years old is the key, maybe do a 10 or 15-year study where you measure people from 40 to 65 or something, 45 to 65, and say, all right, is that real? Because that's what we think it is. Or is it actually just something else that we're missing?
Yeah.
So you can get a little more control. I think doing this in people who have lost weight and kept it off. So there's a national weight loss registry. They don't do double labeled water, but could get at some of the metabolic adaptation questions and lifestyle factors like, hey, if you lose 100 pounds, you got to keep up with it from a lifestyle perspective. Does it also long term over aging, right now, or gender sex differences, does it play a role? So yeah, lots of really cool questions you can do, but big studies, hard studies to do.
Yep. Cool. Brandon, appreciate your time, man. Is there anywhere where you want to lead the audience to or anything coming out on your end that you want to let them know about?
Yeah, I'm not as active because I'm so busy on social media, but Instagram, brob_21. I put stuff out there, mostly in my stories now. Me and my wife are actually working on a skeletal muscle physiology textbook, and which is super
Awesome.
fun. So maybe next year around this time, maybe a little bit, maybe December 2025, be out. Maybe a little after, depends on how well we do. And then there's a really cool study I'm working on with a huge group of people, really good muscle hypertrophy people, on trying to figure out how long or how much muscle you can gain over a certain amount of time. And so we're taking a meta-analysis approach, got a couple statisticians on there. And the question I posed, so listeners go back to your last podcast, is how much muscle can you gain in a certain amount of time? So now I'm leading a team to figure that out. We probably won't get like the answer, but we'll get an answer or a close answer.
Something that's going to lead you to other questions, probably.
Yeah, but it's fun.
Real quick, if you don't mind me asking, what will the textbook be about? Anything like specific in there? That is it going to be like training side, or is it going to be more like the physiology kind of side of things? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's aimed at an upper level undergraduate exercise physiology student or physiology student. It's a skeletal muscle textbook, so that's the focus. But there is definitely a hard push into the practical application side. So when we went into this, we were like, hey, there's a couple textbooks. So the physiology, exercise physiology textbooks are good, but and some of my mentors wrote them. They don't focus enough on muscle. And then you have Schoenfeld's textbook that is all hypertrophy. And there's another textbook that is like super clinical disease. And I'm like, there's nothing that is in the middle. And like my wife is teaching a skeletal muscle physiology class to undergrad and graduate students. She's not a textbook. I'm like, we could write that textbook. And so we are. We've got about 2 or 3 chapters done now, and she's going to use it for her class. You don't write a textbook to make money. I'll be straight up with you. Like, you make basically nothing. It's not worth it. Don't do it. But you do it to gain the experience of doing
Yeah.
it. And I've actually learned quite a bit. I'm like, oh, folks, this is worth it just for me, like personal development stuff. So that's the goal. I think as my hope is that someone like yourself would pick it up and say, hey, like this is useful to me from
Yeah.
a practitioner and from I like science side.
A muscle nerd or something like that, right?
Yeah, basically. Yep.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, I can only imagine the amount of work that goes into making a textbook too. I can't imagine that's a quick process to get done either. Yeah, that'll be super cool. Hopefully we look forward to seeing that, and you'll definitely pick up a copy of that. So cool, Brandon. Again, appreciate your time. We'll have to make sure we don't do 3 years in between. Maybe we can get you back in here a little bit sooner. But yeah, man, appreciate your time and good luck with the rest of prep. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Jeff.